Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. The phone call came at 4:47 a.m., pulling Daniel Mercer from a sleep that had never quite been rest. 8 years as a ranger, and he still woke to every sound in the darkness, the creak of settling wood, wind against window panes, the particular silence that preceded dawn. "Mr. Mercer, please, you have to help us." The woman's voice fractured on the last word. "My daughter. Emma didn't come back from her hike yesterday. The park office said you know the Hoh River trails better than anyone." Daniel's hand tightened on the receiver. Through his cabin window, the Olympic Mountains stood as black cutouts against a sky just beginning to pale. "Ma'am, I need you to slow down. Tell me exactly where your daughter was hiking." The ranger station said she signed in for the Hoh River Trail at noon yesterday. She was supposed to be back by 6. She always calls. Emma always calls. The mother's breath came in shallow gasps. She's 23, smart, experienced. She wouldn't just, please. Daniel was already pulling on his uniform, the fabric familiar against skin that had known too many searches, too many worried families. "What's your daughter's full name?" "Emma Catherine Hartley." He wrote it down, his handwriting steady despite the tremor that lived in his chest these days, the one that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with May 2003. 5 years since Rachel Kim. 5 years since he'd found her hiking boot on the bank of Deer Creek. Laces still tied. No body. No explanation. 5 years since he'd seen what he'd seen in the mist that morning, or thought he'd seen. The therapist in Port Angeles had used different words. Acute stress response. Grief-induced hallucination. The mind protecting itself from trauma. "I'm heading out now," Daniel said. "Stay by your phone." The Hoh rainforest breathed. That's what Daniel had always thought, even before 2003, even when the forest was just a job and not a question he couldn't answer. Sitka spruce and western hemlock rose 300 feet into air so saturated with moisture it felt like breathing underwater. Moss carpeted everything. Nurse logs, granite stones, the very ground itself, in shades of green that had no names in ordinary language. Daniel's pack held 72 hours of supplies, though he hoped to God he wouldn't need them. Search and rescue protocols drilled into him during training played through his mind. Establish last known position, work outward in expanding circles, look for disturbed vegetation, broken branches at shoulder height, footprints in soft earth. Emma's sign-in card sat in his chest pocket. Her handwriting was small and precise. Hoh River Trail to 5 Mile Island. Solo day hike. Expected return 1800 hours. 5 Mile Island. The trail followed the Hoh River through old-growth forest, crossing tributaries on log bridges, climbing gradually through moss-draped corridors where sound behaved strangely. Daniel had hiked it hundreds of times. He knew every switchback, every creek crossing, every place where the trail narrowed and dropped off into ravines thick with sword ferns. He also knew what Rachel Kim's mother had told him, those words he'd never included in any official report. Rachel said she felt watched on that trail. She said the forest was waiting for something. The trailhead parking lot held one vehicle, a green Honda Civic with Colorado plates and a university parking sticker in the rear window. Daniel ran the plates through his radio, registered to Emma C. Hartley, Denver address. He photographed the car from multiple angles, noting the absence of anything unusual. No signs of forced entry, no scattered belongings, nothing to suggest anything but a routine day hike. Except Emma hadn't come back. Daniel shouldered his pack and started up the trail at 6:15 a.m., his headlamp cutting through pre-dawn dimness that the forest seemed reluctant to release. The Hoh River murmured to his left, running high from October rains, its voice a constant presence beneath the drip of water from every surface. His boots knew this path. Heel toe, the rhythm automatic, his mind free to track other things. broken spider webs across the trail indicating recent passage, a granola bar wrapper, not Emma's brand. He'd checked her car. The places where mud held the ghost shapes of footprints. At mile marker 2, he found the first clear sign, a boot print in soft earth beside Mineral Creek, the crossing where hikers often pause to filter water. Women's size 7, a hiking boot with an aggressive tread pattern, fresh, pressed into mud that the morning's light rain hadn't yet eroded. Daniel photographed it, measured it, and felt something cold settle in his stomach that had nothing to do with the October temperature. The print pointed off trail. Every search and rescue manual said the same thing. Most lost hikers are found within a quarter mile of the trail. They get disoriented, follow what they think is the path, realize their mistake too late. Panic sets in. They move erratically, exhaust themselves, succumb to hypothermia even in summer months. But Emma's print didn't show panic. It showed purpose. The stride length was normal, the depth even. She'd walked off the trail deliberately, stepping over a nurse log thick with licorice ferns, heading northeast into terrain that grew steep and difficult within 100 yards. Daniel keyed his radio. "Station 1, this is Mercer. I've got sign at Mineral Creek Crossing. Subject appears to have left trail heading 045 degrees. Beginning track." Static crackled, then Jamie Kowalski's voice, younger than Daniel by 15 years, untouched by the things that carved lines into a person's capacity for certainty. "Copy that, Mercer. Want me to request additional resources?" "Not yet. Trail's still fresh. I'll update in 1 hour." What he didn't say, "This feels wrong. This feels like before." The forest off trail was a different world. Here the moss grew so thick on fallen logs that Daniel's boots sank inches with each step, releasing the smell of decay and rich earth. Sword ferns reached higher than his waist, their fronds beaded with moisture that soaked his pants within minutes. Devil's club lurked in the understory, its leaves the size of dinner plates, stems armed with spines that could punch through fabric. Emma's trail wove through this chaos with unnatural precision. She avoided the devil's club, stepped over rotting logs instead of on them, chose the paths of least resistance as if she'd walked this route 1,000 times. Except there was no trail here. Just trackless rainforest that few visitors ever saw. Daniel's radio hissed and popped, the signal fragmenting as the terrain closed around him. He marked his route with orange flagging tape, tying strips to branches every 30 feet, creating a lifeline back to certainty. The trees grew larger the deeper he went. Old growth that had never known a saw, their trunks 12 feet in diameter, their roots creating cathedral spaces beneath them. Water dripped constantly, from leaves, from moss, from the air itself, filling the silence with whispers that weren't quite random. At what his GPS marked as 0.7 miles from the trail, Daniel found Emma's water bottle. It sat upright on a flat stone, cap secured, still 3/4 full. Beside it, a protein bar, unopened, her trail mix bag, untouched. No one left food and water behind. Not when hiking, not ever. Daniel's pulse kicked up, that old familiar rhythm he'd hoped never to feel again. His hand went to the Glock on his hip, standard issue, 17 rounds he'd never fired outside the range, and stayed there. "Emma!" His voice shattered the dripping quiet. "Emma Hartley, if you can hear me, call out." The forest swallowed his words and gave back nothing. He photographed the items, noting their deliberate arrangement. Not dropped, not scattered in panic, placed, like offerings, like Rachel Kim's hiking boot. The therapist's voice, calm and clinical. "The mind seeks patterns, Daniel, especially traumatized minds. They'll find connections even where none exist because connection feels safer than randomness." Daniel's jaw clenched. He bagged the water bottle, marked the location in his GPS, and kept moving. Emma's footprints continued northeast, climbing now, following what might have been an old game trail or might have been nothing at all. The slope steepened. Daniel grabbed hemlock roots for handholds, pulling himself up inclines, slick with moss and rotting vegetation. His radio was dead weight now, nothing but static. No cell signal had ever reached this deep into the hoe. He was alone with the breathing forest and whatever had called Emma Hartley off the marked trail. At elevation 1,847 feet, the trees opened into a clearing he'd never seen before. The space was roughly circular, maybe 40 feet across, carpeted in moss so green it seemed to glow in the filtered light. A creek ran along the far edge, its water dark and quick over stones worn smooth. And in the center, Daniel stopped. A western hemlock stood alone, its trunk scarred black on one side from an old lightning strike. Carved into the burned wood, weathered but still legible, were letters. RK, 2003. His vision tunneled. The forest tilted and Daniel's boot slipped on wet moss. He caught himself against a boulder, bark rough under his palm, breathing too fast. Rachel Kim, her initials. The year she disappeared, he'd searched for 63 days, found nothing but that boot. The official report said she'd likely fallen into the Ho during spring flood stage, her body swept downstream into the Pacific. Case closed. Move on. Except here were her initials, carved into a tree, 0, 9 miles from any established trail, in a clearing he'd never found despite searching every grid square within a 5-mile radius. You didn't see what you thought you saw, the therapist had said. Grief creates images. Trauma manufactures meaning. But this was real. Carved wood. Specific letters. Daniel moved closer, his legs functioning on muscle memory while his mind tried to process. The carving was old, 5 years old if the date was accurate. The burned bark had begun growing over the edges, the tree slowly reclaiming its wound. Below the initials, more words. She took me. Daniel's hand went to his radio before he remembered it was useless here. A sound behind him, soft, like fabric against bark. He spun, hand on his weapon, heart hammering. Nothing. Just trees and moss and the eternal drip of water. "Emma!" His voice cracked. "Is anyone there?" Silence except footsteps. Unmistakable. Moving through the undergrowth to his left, Daniel drew his Glock, flashlight in his other hand, training taking over. "Park Service, identify yourself." The footsteps stopped. He waited, weapon raised, counting his breaths. 5, 10, 15. Then, from deeper in the forest, "Help me." A woman's voice, thin and distant. Emma Hartley? "Please, I'm lost. I can't find the trail." Relief and adrenaline hit Daniel simultaneously. "Keep talking. I'm coming to you. What's your location?" "I don't know. Everything looks the same. There's so much moss. I've been walking in circles." Daniel moved toward the voice, his boots finding purchase on root and stone, his flashlight cutting between tree trunks. "Stay where you are. I'm a ranger. You're safe now." "I'm so cold. Hypothermia. Shit." Emma had been out here for 18 hours minimum. October nights in the Olympics dropped to 40 degrees, with the constant moisture. "I'm 50 yards from you," Daniel called, crashing through ferns, following the voice. "Keep talking." "I saw her," Emma said, and something in her tone made Daniel slow. "Saw who?" "The woman in the water. She was calling my name." Daniel stopped. His flashlight beam trembled. "Emma, you need to—" "She knew my name," the voice continued, closer now but somehow wrong, the cadence off. "She said I could come down to the creek. She said it was safe. She said—" Daniel's light found her. She stood 30 feet away, beside a massive Sitka spruce, her back to him, dark hair, hiking clothes, the right height and build. "Emma?" Daniel's voice was careful now. "Turn around slowly." She didn't move. "Emma, I need you to face me." "Do you know what it's like?" she said, and her voice was all wrong now, layered, like 3 people speaking in unison. "To drown in inches of water, to feel it fill your lungs while your mind screams but your body won't move?" Daniel's finger found the trigger. "Who are you?" She turned. The face was Emma's. He recognized her from the photo her mother had texted him. But her eyes were vacant pools that reflected his flashlight beam like animal eyes in the dark. Her clothes dripped steadily despite the absence of rain. Her skin held the gray-blue shade of a 3-day drowning victim. "She pushed me," Emma said. Except it wasn't Emma anymore. It was Rachel Kim's voice. The voice he'd heard on her voicemail 5 years ago. The voice that had stopped leaving messages after May 2003. Held my face under. I tried to fight. My hands. I scratched. I fought so hard. Daniel backed up, his training deserting him, his weapon useless against something that couldn't be real. You're not here. This isn't happening. Injustice, the thing wearing Emma's body said, stepping forward, water squelching from her boots. That's what binds us. That's what keeps us here. We drowned while she walked free. More footsteps all around him now. Daniel spun, his light catching movement between the trees. Figures, women, all of them dripping, all of them advancing. Who? He managed. Who walked free? The Emma thing smiled, and its teeth were black with creek mud. You know. You've always known. You found the evidence. You wrote the report. And then you buried it because the truth was too uncomfortable. Daniel's back hit a tree. His mind raced through every case file, every incident report from his 8 years as a ranger. September 1998, Rachel's voice said from Emma's mouth. Jennifer Walsh drowned in Deer Creek, ruled accidental, July 2000. Michelle Torres, drowned in Ho River tributary, ruled accidental, April 2002. Sarah Chen drowned in... Stop. Daniel's voice was barely audible. May 2003, Rachel Kim, October 2008. Emma Hartley, all brunettes, all 5'6", all solo hikers, all drowned in shallow water. The thing stepped closer. All killed by the same woman. If this story is gripping your attention, follow for more quality content. What would you do in Daniel's situation? Share your thoughts below. The clearing had filled with them. 7 women, all dripping, all wearing the faces of the missing, the forgotten, the cases marked accidental death and filed away. Daniel's legs gave out. He slid down the tree trunk, his weapon falling from nerveless fingers. 5 years of therapy, of medication, of telling himself he'd imagined the figure in the mist that morning. All of it crumbled. There's no woman, he whispered. The investigations found nothing, no evidence of foul play, no suspects. Because you stopped looking. This from a woman Daniel recognized from old case files. Jennifer Walsh, 1998, the first name on the list. Because pattern recognition is hard when the killer is patient. 1 every 2 years. Different locations, different seasons. Always ruled accidental. Who? Daniel forced the word out. Who is she? Margaret Ashford, Rachel's voice said. But you won't find her in any database. She doesn't exist on paper. Hasn't since 1963. The name triggered something. A fragment of local history Daniel had heard years ago from old-timers at the ranger station. The Ashford drowning, the daughter who died when her mother held her under. Jesus. That was 60 years ago, the Emma thing confirmed. Margaret Ashford was 13 when her mother drowned her in Lake Crescent for the sin of existing, for being mouthy, for being difficult, for being born. Water dripped from her hair, each drop hitting moss with a sound like accusations. The mother walked free, self-defense, they said. The girl attacked her, no witnesses to contradict, case closed. Daniel's mind cataloged everything automatically, even as his hands shook. Margaret can't still be alive. She'd be... We're not talking about alive. Jennifer Walsh stepped forward. Her throat showed dark bruising, finger-shaped. We're talking about justice that couldn't rest. About a 13-year-old girl who drowned knowing her killer would face no consequences. About rage that outlasted death. She hunts, Rachel said. Women who look like she did. Women alone in the forest. She befriends them, hikes with them, talks about the beauty of the water, how peaceful it is. And then Emma's body convulsed. When she spoke again, her voice was different, younger, small, broken. Please, I don't want to die. I haven't done anything wrong. Please, Mama, please. The voice cut off in a gurgling choke. Daniel forced himself to stand. His legs trembled, but he stayed upright. Where is Emma? The real Emma. Is she alive? 7 pairs of dead eyes fixed on him. You're standing, Rachel said, in the only place Margaret Ashford never goes. The lightning-struck tree, sacred ground, after a fashion. The one place her spirit won't touch. Daniel looked up at the scarred hemlock. Why? Because this is where we carved our testament. Every woman who knew, every woman who fought. She can't erase what's burned into living wood. Hope flickered. Then Emma, if she made it here, she made it. The Emma thing pointed toward the creek. She's there, in the water. Margaret left her there to drown slowly, but Emma fought. Emma was strong. She got away, made it to the tree, carved her initials before she... Daniel was already running. The creek was 15 feet wide, running fast over smooth stones, clear enough to see the bottom even in the filtered light. And there, caught in an eddy behind a boulder, her face just below the surface. Emma. Daniel plunged in, the October water hitting like electric shock, stealing his breath. He grabbed her jacket, hauled her up, her body limp and too cold. No pulse. Blue lips. How long? Too long. He dragged her to the bank, started compressions, counting automatically. 30 compressions. 2 breaths. Her chest didn't rise, water in the lungs. He turned her, struck between her shoulder blades. Water poured from her mouth. Again, more water. Come on, Emma. Your mother's waiting. Come on. 30 compressions. 2 breaths. Behind him, the 7 women watched. 30 compressions. 2 breaths. Emma's body convulsed. She vomited creek water and bile, gasped, her eyes flying open. They were brown and alive, and hers. I've got you, Daniel said, his voice breaking. You're safe. I've got you. She grabbed his jacket with fingers that barely worked, her whole body shaking. The woman, she tried to... I know. She's gone now. Emma's eyes found the 7 figures standing in the clearing, and she screamed. They're not here to hurt you, Daniel said, surprised by the certainty in his voice. They're witnesses. Rachel Kim stepped forward, and for the first time since she'd appeared, she smiled. Not with drowned lips and dead eyes, but with the warmth Daniel remembered from the photo her mother had kept on the ranger station bulletin board for 2 years. Thank you, Rachel said, for finding her, for believing. I should have believed 5 years ago. You weren't ready 5 years ago. She looked at the other women and something passed between them. Understanding or permission or peace. But now you are. Now you can finish it. Finish what? Find Margaret Ashford's body. Give her justice. Let her rest. Let us rest. Where? Rachel pointed northeast, deeper into the forest. Lake Crescent, where it started, where she's tied. We'll show you. I need to get Emma out first. She needs a hospital. Of course, Rachel's form was already fading, becoming translucent in the filtered light. We'll wait. We've waited 60 years. We can wait another day. One by one, the 7 women dissolved into mist, not vanishing, but transforming, becoming part of the water and air and breathing forest. Emma shuddered in Daniel's arms. Was that? Yes, Daniel said, because there was no other answer now, no more room for doubt or rationalization. Can you walk? I think so. He helped her stand, wrapped her in his emergency blanket, and began the slow journey back toward the marked trail. Behind them, the scarred hemlock stood sentinel, its burden of initials a testament carved in wood and memory, and the stubborn refusal of injustice to stay buried. The search team found them 4 hours later, hypothermic but alive, Emma babbling about a woman who'd tried to drown her, Daniel saying nothing until his report could be written carefully, strategically, with enough truth to matter and enough omission to be believed. Emma recovered. Her statement, taken 3 days later in a Port Angeles hospital room, described a woman in her 70s who'd approached her on the trail, seemed friendly, suggested a secret spot to see the creek. The description matched nothing in any database. No tire tracks at the trailhead beyond Emma's car. No evidence of anyone else. But Daniel believed her. And a week later, with Emma's blessing and her mother's gratitude still warm in his chest, Daniel returned to the Olympic National Forest. He carried diving equipment this time, and a map hand-drawn by 7 dead women who'd appeared to him in dreams. Rachel Kim most prominent, her instructions clear: northeast shore of Lake Crescent, 60 feet down, beneath the old avalanche debris. The water was cold enough to kill in 30 minutes. Daniel's wetsuit held warmth but barely. His light cut through darkness green with algae and sediment, illuminating a landscape of drowned logs and stone. At 58 feet he found the skeleton. It rested in a crevice between boulders, dressed in rotted fabric that might once have been a cotton dress. The skull showed trauma, a depression above the right eye socket, the kind of injury caused by a stone or a fist or a mother's rage. Small bones, child-sized. Margaret Ashford, age 13, missing since 1948, presumed drowned accidentally. Not accidental, not even close. Daniel surfaced, called it in, and watched as the King County Medical Examiner's team arrived to recover remains that would rewrite 60 years of accepted history. The bones told their story: perimortem fractures, blunt force trauma, drowning as secondary cause of death. Margaret Ashford had been beaten unconscious and then drowned. Her mother's testimony, that the girl had attacked her, that the drowning was self-defense, was revealed as the lie it had always been, too late for justice in any legal sense. Margaret's mother had died in 1985, never charged, never punished. But the bones were found. The truth was spoken. Margaret's death was reclassified as homicide. And that night, in the Hoh rainforest, 7 women appeared to Daniel one final time. They didn't speak. They simply stood in the clearing beneath the scarred hemlock, their forms solid for the first time, their eyes clear and peaceful. Rachel Kim smiled at him, a real smile, warm and whole. Then they were gone. Not dissolving, not transforming, just absent. The forest returned to its ordinary breathing, its natural sounds, its rain and growth and decay. Daniel stood alone among the old trees, knowing he'd never be alone there again. Not haunted now, but witnessed, accompanied by the memory of women who'd refused to be forgotten. He carved one more set of initials into the lightning-struck tree. M.A. 1948-2008, rest in justice. 60 years delayed. Emma Hartley returned to Colorado the following week. She called Daniel once a month for the next year, needing to talk to someone who'd understand, who'd seen what she'd seen. The calls eventually stopped, which Daniel took as a good sign. She was moving on, living, doing the things the 7 women never could. Daniel stayed at Olympic National Park for 3 more years before transferring to Mount Rainier. Not running away, exactly. Just moving forward. The forest had given him back something he'd lost when Rachel Kim disappeared. The certainty that what he'd seen was real. That trust in his own perception wasn't weakness, but survival. The nightmares faded. The medication dosage decreased. The therapist in Port Angeles called it breakthrough, recovery, healing. Daniel called it justice. And sometimes on quiet patrols through old-growth forest where mist clung to moss and water dripped eternal, he'd see them. Not as ghosts, but as memory, as presence, as the stubborn truth that some wrongs echo until they're answered. He'd learned to listen. He'd learned to believe. And he'd learned that the forest didn't breathe with malice, but with patience. The kind of patience that could wait 60 years for someone willing to finally look close enough to see. Thank you for reading to the end. If you enjoyed this narrative, consider following for more engaging stories. What's your interpretation of Margaret Ashford's final rest? I'd love to hear your theories in the comments. Was justice truly served? Or does the forest still hold secrets? Share your thoughts below. David Mercer had been a ranger at Olympic National Park for 14 years. long enough to know that the Ho rainforest held secrets in its moss-draped silence. Long enough to understand that when families called at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, their voices fractured with panic. Something had already gone terribly wrong. "Please," the woman's voice crackled through the phone line. "Please, my daughter didn't come back. Emily, she's been gone since yesterday afternoon." David pulled on his boots. Danner Acadius, 7 years old, resoled twice and studied the topographic map spread across his kitchen table. His coffee had gone cold an hour ago. Sarah and the kids were still asleep upstairs, and he'd kissed his daughter Mia's forehead before leaving their bedroom, a habit that had intensified over the years. Every missing person case made him hold his own children tighter. "Mrs. Chen, I need you to tell me exactly where Emily planned to hike," he said, his pen hovering over the map. "The Ho River Trail. She wanted to photograph the Hall of Mosses. She's done it before, she knows the trails, but she didn't come back to the trailhead." A sob caught in her throat. "Her car's still there. We found it last night. The rangers told us to wait until morning, but I'm heading there now." David interrupted gently. "I'll find her." He meant it. In 14 years, he'd brought back 17 lost hikers. Only one had been a recovery instead of a rescue, and that man had suffered a heart attack beyond anyone's help. Emily Chen would be number 18. He'd make sure of it. The Ho rainforest swallowed sound. David had explained this to countless tourists over the years, how the layers of Sitka spruce, western hemlock, and big-leaf maple, all draped in club moss and licorice fern, absorbed noise until even your own footsteps seemed borrowed from someone else's memory. But knowing it intellectually and experiencing it at 7:30 in the morning, with fog settling like gauze between the trees, were different things. Emily's car sat alone at the trailhead. A silver Honda Civic, Washington plates, a university parking permit stuck to the windshield. David checked the doors. Locked. He peered through the windows. A North Face backpack sat in the passenger seat. Unusual. Most hikers took their packs with them. He radioed dispatch. "Mercer here. Subject vehicle confirmed at Ho River Trailhead. Beginning search pattern Alpha. Subject is Emily Chen, 23, 5'4", approximately 120 pounds. Last seen yesterday, 3 p.m. Copy that, Mercer. Weather's supposed to turn this afternoon. We've got Thompson and Rodriguez en route. ETA 45 minutes. 45 minutes. David studied the trail registry, flipping back through yesterday's entries. Emily's signature was there, neat and confident. Emily Chen, 2:47 p.m. Below it, only 2 other entries for the entire afternoon. A couple from Portland who'd signed out at 5:15 p.m. David shouldered his pack, first aid kit, emergency blanket, SAR beacon, water purification tablets, rope, his Motorola radio, and started up the trail. The Park Service had drummed into him the importance of systematic searching, of staying calm, of following protocol. But Emily's mother's voice kept playing in his head, that raw edge of terror that came from knowing your child was somewhere in the wilderness, alone. His own daughter was 9, same age as Emily would have been in 2001. The thought came unbidden, unwelcome. The trail wound through the rainforest like a suggestion rather than a demand. Massive nurse logs, fallen trees that hosted entire ecosystems on their decomposing backs, lined the path. David had walked this route hundreds of times, leading nature talks, clearing deadfall, checking campsites. He knew every switchback, every landmark. At mile 1.3, the trail split, left toward the Hall of Mosses, right continuing along the Ho River. Emily would have gone left. Everyone went left first. David took the left fork and immediately noticed something wrong. The silence had changed, not louder or quieter, different, as if the forest was holding something in its mouth, waiting to swallow or speak. He stopped walking, listening. The Ho River should have been audible from here, a constant whisper through the trees. He heard nothing. Emily. His voice disappeared into the moss. Emily Chen. Nothing. He continued forward, scanning the underbrush for any sign of passage. At the Hall of Mosses junction, He found what he was looking for. A single boot print in the mud, heading off trail toward the northeast. Small, fresh, consistent with a woman's size, 7 or 8. David keyed his radio. Mercer to dispatch. Found track heading 045 degrees from Hall of Mosses Junction. Pursuing. Copy. Be advised, Thompson and Rodriguez are 20 minutes out. David marked the spot with orange flagging tape and stepped off the trail. The rainforest off-trail was a different world. What looked like clear forest floor from the path revealed itself as a maze of hidden creeks, rotting logs disguised by moss, and thickets of salal that grabbed at your legs. David moved carefully, checking his compass every 30 feet, marking his route with flagging tape every 100. Emily's tracks appeared and disappeared. Here, a partial print in soft earth. There, a snapped fern frond. The track suggested someone moving quickly, not lost but purposeful, heading somewhere. After 20 minutes, David found Emily's jacket. It lay draped over a fallen log, a red Columbia windbreaker, exactly the kind any sensible hiker would bring. He picked it up, checked the pockets. Empty. No signs of struggle, no tears. Just carefully placed, as if Emily had gotten warm and decided to shed a layer. Except the temperature was 52 degrees and the fog made everything damp and clammy. "Emily," David called again. "My name is David. I'm here to help you." This time, he heard something. A voice, distant and muffled, coming from deeper in the forest. "Help." David's training kicked in. He triangulated the direction, marked his position, and radioed his coordinates. Mercer to dispatch. Audible contact with possible subject, proceeding northeast from my position. Coordinates 47.8643 minus 123.9357. Copy that. We're vectoring Thompson and Rodriguez to your position. David moved faster now, pushing through the undergrowth. The voice came again, clearer. "Help me." It sounded like Sarah. David stopped mid-step. His breath caught. That was impossible. Sarah was at home, probably making breakfast right now, probably wondering why he'd left so early without waking her properly. "Hello?" he called. "David, help me." Definitely Sarah's voice. The same slight rasp she got in the mornings, the way she drew out his name when she was worried. "This isn't real," David said aloud. His voice sounded small. "David, please." He stood frozen, his rational mind warring with something deeper, more primitive. He'd heard about this. Auditory hallucinations brought on by stress and isolation. He'd experienced it himself once, years ago, when he'd gotten separated from his team during a winter search. He'd sworn he heard his father calling him, despite his father having died 3 years prior. This was the same thing. Stress, exhaustion, the oppressive silence of the rainforest playing tricks. Except this felt different. David checked his compass. The voice was coming from bearing 060. He looked down. Emily's tracks continued in the same direction. He followed. If this story is capturing your attention, follow for more quality content. What would you do in David's situation? Share your thoughts. The forest grew denser. The western hemlocks here were old growth, some 5 feet in diameter, their bark deeply furrowed and dark with moisture. The canopy above blocked out most of the morning light, creating a perpetual twilight. David's watch read 9:17 a.m., but it felt like dusk. The voice had stopped. He hadn't heard it for 10 minutes. Instead, he'd found more of Emily's belongings. A water bottle carefully placed on a stump. A camera, high-end Canon, sitting on a rock as if positioned for a shot. Each item felt like a breadcrumb, deliberately placed, leading him somewhere. David's radio crackled. "Mercer, this is Thompson. We're at the Hall of Mosses Junction. Where are you?" He gave his coordinates, described his route. "I found several items belonging to the subject. She's definitely out here. We're heading your way. Visibility's getting worse with this fog. Stay put until we reach you." Copy. David didn't stay put. He couldn't explain why, but something pulled him forward. The forest seemed to be breathing around him, the moss-covered trees expanding and contracting with a rhythm that matched his heartbeat. Nonsense. Lack of sleep. He'd been up since 4 a.m., running on 4 hours of rest and cold coffee. Then he saw Emily. She stood 50 yards ahead, barely visible through the fog and undergrowth. A young woman in hiking clothes, her dark hair pulled back, facing away from him. "Emily!" David called. "Emily Chen!" She didn't turn. David moved forward, relief flooding through him. Found her. She was alive, probably disoriented, maybe hypothermic, but alive. He'd bring her back. Another successful rescue. He'd call Mrs. Chen, hear the joy in her voice, then go home and hug Mia and tell Sarah about his day. "Emily, my name is David Mercer. I'm a park ranger. Your mother sent me to find you." Emily still didn't turn. She stood perfectly still, arms at her sides. David was 30 yards away now. Something felt wrong. Emily's posture was too rigid, too motionless. People didn't stand like that, especially not lost hikers who'd been in the woods overnight. "Emily?" She turned. It wasn't Emily. It wasn't anyone. The figure had Emily's shape, Emily's clothes, but the face was wrong, blurred, indistinct, like a photograph taken with a shaking hand. Where eyes should have been, there were only dark hollows. The mouth moved, but no sound emerged. Then it smiled. David stumbled backward. His rational mind screamed that this was impossible, a hallucination, stress-induced psychosis. But the thing wearing Emily's shape took a step toward him, and David's body made the decision his mind couldn't. He ran. He crashed through the undergrowth, branches whipping his face, his compass forgotten, his training abandoned. Behind him he heard movement. Not footsteps exactly, but a rustling, like wind through leaves, except there was no wind. David's radio crackled. A voice emerged, distorted and strange. "Daddy?" Mia's voice. "Daddy, where are you?" David's legs went weak. He grabbed a tree trunk to steady himself, his chest heaving. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. Mia was at home, probably eating cereal, probably watching cartoons. "Daddy, I'm scared." "Stop it," David whispered. "Stop it. Come find me, Daddy." He looked back. The figure was closer now, 30 feet away, moving without seeming to move, gliding between trees. It still wore Emily's shape, but the edges were coming apart, fragmenting like smoke. David forced himself to think. North. He needed to go north. Back to the trail. He fumbled for his compass. The needle spun wildly, refusing to settle. He shook it, still spinning. His radio crackled again. This time, his own voice emerged from the speaker. "This is Mercer. I found her. I found Emily. She's dead." "I didn't say that," David said aloud. "I didn't." "Mercer, repeat your last?" Thompson's actual voice, tinny and distant. "I didn't say anything," David shouted into the radio. "Mercer, you're breaking up. Can't understand you. What's your position?" The figure was 20 feet away now, close enough that David could see it wasn't just Emily anymore. The shape kept shifting. Emily, then Sarah, then Mia, then faces he didn't recognize, then something that wasn't a face at all. David ran again. He didn't know how long he ran. The forest blurred into green and gray, every direction the same, every tree identical. His breath came in ragged gasps. His legs burned. Twice he tripped over hidden roots and went sprawling into the moss. Each time he scrambled up and kept running, driven by a terror that bypassed thought entirely. Finally his body gave out. He collapsed against a massive Sitka spruce, his lungs screaming, his vision swimming with dark spots. He groped for his water bottle, took a shaking drink, and tried to calm his breathing. Think. He was a trained professional. 14 years of experience. He'd dealt with emergencies before. He knew these woods. Except he didn't recognize anything around him. The forest here looked different. Wrong. The trees grew at odd angles, spiraling rather than straight. The moss hung in patterns that hurt to look at, geometric and intentional. The silence was absolute. David checked his watch. 11:34 a.m. He'd been running for over 2 hours. Impossible. It had felt like minutes. His radio remained silent. He tried calling Thompson. Static. Dispatch. Static. Nothing but white noise. He was alone. No. Not alone. Never alone out here. The thought came from somewhere outside himself, slipping into his mind like water into a crack. David stood up, steadied himself against the tree. He needed to find water, the Ho River. If he could reach the river, he could follow it downstream back to the trail. Basic wilderness survival. He chose a direction at random and started walking. His legs felt distant, as if operating on their own. Each step required concentration. The forest swayed around him, or maybe he was swaying, he couldn't tell. After a while, minutes, hours, he heard water. Relief surged through him. The river. He'd found it. He pushed through a dense thicket of salal and emerged at the water's edge. It wasn't the Ho River. This water was wrong. Too dark, almost black, and perfectly still. No current, no movement at all. The surface looked like obsidian, reflecting nothing. David knelt at the edge, staring at his reflection. Except it wasn't his reflection. The face looking back at him was emaciated, hollow-eyed, months of growth on its jaw. It smiled at him with too many teeth. "No," David whispered. The reflection's mouth moved, speaking words David felt rather than heard. "You've been here before." David scrambled backward from the water's edge. His mind raced. Dehydration. That's what this was. Dehydration causing hallucinations. He needed to purify water, drink, restore his electrolyte balance. He fumbled for his pack, pulled out his water purification tablets. His hands shook so badly he dropped the container, tablets scattering across the moss. When he looked up, Emily Chen sat across from him. The real Emily this time, not the thing that had worn her shape. She looked exhausted, her face scratched and dirty, her eyes distant. "Emily?" David's voice cracked. "Are you real?" Emily looked at him with an expression of profound sadness. "Does it matter?" "Yes," David said. "Yes, it matters. Your mother is looking for you. I'm here to bring you home." "Home," Emily repeated. She picked up one of David's spilled tablets, turned it over in her fingers. "I came here to photograph the moss. Did you know some of these club mosses are over 500 years old? Living things that have seen centuries pass. What do you think they remember? Emily, we need to go now, before dark." "It's always dark here," Emily said. She looked up at the canopy. "Or always light. I can't tell anymore. How long have I been here?" "Since yesterday afternoon." "That's not right," Emily shook her head. "It's been longer. Much longer." David moved closer, slowly, as if approaching a spooked animal. "What happened to you? Why did you leave the trail?" "I heard someone calling my name. A child. She said she was lost." Emily's eyes focused on David. "You heard it too, didn't you? That's why you're here. It called you with something you love." David's throat tightened. "It's not real. None of this is real." "Isn't it?" Emily gestured around them. "The trees are real. The water is real. We're real. What else matters?" "The thing that brought us here is real too," Emily finished. "More real than anything. It's been here longer than the trees, longer than the moss. It's been here since before there were names for things." David studied Emily's face, trying to assess her mental state. Severe psychological trauma, exposure-induced psychosis. He'd seen it before in lost hikers, the way prolonged stress and fear could fracture someone's grip on reality. "Emily, listen to me. We're going to walk out together. I know the way." "Do you?" Emily tilted her head. "Then why are you here?" The question hit harder than it should have. Why was he here? He'd followed Emily's tracks, found her belongings, pursued a voice that sounded like Sarah. Each step had seemed logical at the time, but now, looking back, The sequence felt dreamlike, as if he'd been following a script written by someone else. "I came to rescue you," David said, but even to his own ears it sounded uncertain. "No one comes here to rescue anyone," Emily said. "They come because they're called, because it's hungry." "What's hungry?" Emily pointed at the dark water. "It lives in the quiet places, between thoughts, in the spaces where people stop paying attention. It's been feeding on me for..." She paused. "How long did you say?" "Since yesterday." "Liar," Emily said without malice. "It's been months. I've forgotten what my mother's face looks like." David's professional training reassembled itself in his mind. Emily was in crisis, delusional. He needed to get her moving, get her warm, get her out. He reached for her arm. The moment he touched her, the forest changed. The trees were burning. No, not burning. They were filled with light, glowing from within, pulsing in rhythm with David's heartbeat. The moss crawled across bark like living lace. The silence became a roar, 1,000 voices speaking at once in languages David almost understood. And he saw them, figures moving between the trees, dozens of them, hundreds, all wearing familiar shapes, all wrong. Some looked like Emily, some looked like Sarah, some looked like hikers David had rescued years ago, some looked like people who'd gone missing and never been found. All of them turned to look at him. "Do you see now?" Emily asked. Her voice sounded distant, echoing, "Do you see what remembers?" David tried to let go of her arm, but his hand wouldn't move. The contact kept him locked in this vision, forced him to witness what the forest held. "It doesn't want to hurt us," Emily said. "It's lonely. It's been alone for so long. It just wants us to stay, to remember with it." "Let go," David whispered. "I can't. It won't let me." The figures were closer now, forming a circle around David and Emily. He recognized faces from missing person reports going back decades. A hiker who'd vanished in 1987, a camper from 1995, a researcher from 2003. All of them standing perfectly still, perfectly silent, their eyes empty of everything except recognition. They'd been here the whole time. David wrenched his hand away from Emily, breaking the contact. Immediately, the vision collapsed. The burning light extinguished. The figures vanished. He was back in the ordinary forest, gray and quiet. Emily sitting across from him, looking small and lost. "It showed you," Emily said. "Now you understand. We don't leave. We become part of what remembers." David's mind reeled. He needed to think, needed to plan, but his thoughts kept slipping away like trying to hold water. How long had he been out here? Hours? Days? His watch had stopped, the hands frozen at 11:34. "Emily," he said, forcing each word out carefully, "do you want to leave?" She considered this for a long time. "I don't remember what wanting feels like." "Then I'll want it for both of us." David stood up, his legs unsteady. He extended his hand to her. "Come on. We're leaving." Emily looked at his hand but didn't take it. "You don't know the way out." "I'll find it." "You can't find what isn't there. Watch me." Something flickered in Emily's eyes. A spark of the person she'd been before the forest took her. She reached out, hesitated, then grasped David's hand. The moment their skin touched, David felt it, something vast and cold pressing against his mind, trying to fold him into its memory. It whispered in a language older than words, promising him peace, promising him belonging, promising him an end to the terrible burden of being separate. He thought of Sarah, of Mia, of his son Jacob, only 6 years old, who still asked David to check under the bed for monsters. "No," David said. He pulled Emily to her feet and ran. The forest fought them. Branches appeared where none had been. Roots shifted underfoot. The ground tilted at impossible angles. Behind them, the rustling grew louder. Not wind, but something massive moving through the trees, something that wore faces like masks and fed on memory. Emily stumbled, went down hard. David hauled her up, his arm around her waist, half carrying her. "I can't," Emily gasped. "It hurts. Leaving hurts." "I know," David said, though he didn't, not really. But he could feel it starting, a pulling sensation like hooks in his mind, trying to drag him back into the forest's memory. They crashed through undergrowth, Emily sobbing, David's lungs burning. The forest blurred around them, trees becoming suggestions, the path ahead becoming uncertain. Then David saw it. Orange flagging tape, his marker, from hours ago, when he'd first left the trail. Impossible that they'd circled back here, but there it was, fluttering from a hemlock branch. "The trail," David croaked. "It's close." He could hear it now, not with his ears, but deeper, a memory of sound. The Hoh River, running water, the real river, not the black mirror he'd found earlier. Emily made a sound between a laugh and a sob. "It's letting us go." "No," David said. "We're taking ourselves." He didn't know if that was true, but saying it made it feel true. They burst through a final wall of salal and stumbled onto the trail. The actual Hoh River Trail, familiar and solid and blessedly normal. David collapsed to his knees, dragging Emily down with him. For a long moment, they simply breathed. Then David heard voices. Real voices. Human voices. "Mercer. Mercer, is that you?" Thompson and Rodriguez crashed through the undergrowth, their faces bright with relief and confusion. "Jesus, Mercer, we've been searching for 12 hours. Where the hell have you been?" 12 hours. David looked at his watch. The hands had started moving again. 8:47 p.m. It was night. He'd lost an entire day. "I found her," David said, his voice hoarse. "Emily Chen, she's here." Rodriguez knelt beside Emily, checking her vital signs, wrapping her in an emergency blanket. Emily stared at nothing, her eyes glazed. "Mercer, you look like hell," Thompson said. "What happened out there?" David opened his mouth to answer, but the words wouldn't come. How could he explain? Hallucination? Dehydration? Stress? That's what the report would say. That's what everyone would believe. But he'd touched it. He'd seen what remembered. "We got lost," David finally said. "The fog. Visibility was bad." Thompson accepted this because what else could he say? They walked Emily out, David following on unsteady legs. Emergency services waited at the trailhead. Ambulances, search and rescue vehicles, Emily's parents. Mrs. Chen sobbed as they loaded Emily into the ambulance. Emily didn't react, didn't seem to see her mother at all. A paramedic tried to check David over, but he waved them away. "I'm fine, just tired." "You should get looked at," the paramedic insisted. "I will. Tomorrow." He wouldn't. He knew he wouldn't. David sat in his truck for a long time, watching the ambulance drive away. His radio lay on the passenger seat silent. His compass sat beside it, the needle pointing steadily north now, as if nothing had been wrong. He drove home in silence, arrived at 11:22 p.m. Sarah was waiting up, her face tight with worry. "David? My God, where were you? The Park Service called hours ago, said you were fine, but..." He pulled her into his arms, held her so tightly she gasped. "I'm here," he whispered. "I'm here. You're scaring me." "I know, I'm sorry." He went upstairs, checked on the kids. Mia was asleep, her nightlight casting soft shadows. Jacob had kicked off his blankets. David tucked them back around him, his hands trembling. "Daddy?" Jacob murmured, half asleep. "Just checking for monsters," David whispered. "There's no such thing as monsters," Jacob said with the absolute confidence of childhood. David didn't answer. 3 weeks later, the report went into the files as a standard rescue. Hiker Emily Chen, disoriented due to exposure and dehydration, recovered after 36 hours missing. Ranger David Mercer also experienced mild disorientation due to extended search operations in poor visibility. Both recovered fully. The report was a lie. Emily Chen was in a psychiatric facility in Seattle. She didn't speak anymore. She didn't eat unless forced. She sat by the window and stared at nothing, sometimes smiling at something no one else could see. David went back to work. He led nature talks. He cleared trails. He checked permits. He did everything exactly as he'd done for 14 years. But he didn't go into the forest alone anymore. And sometimes, late at night, he heard voices calling his name. Sarah's voice, Mia's voice, Jacob's voice, coming from the dark spaces between thoughts, from the quiet places where attention slipped. He never answered, because David Mercer knew the truth that the forest had taught him. Some things remember longer than they should. Some things are hungry in ways that have nothing to do with flesh. And some rescues aren't rescues at all, just postponements. The Hoh rainforest still stood, silent and patient, its moss-covered trees breathing in their centuries-long rhythm, waiting for the next person to hear their name called from the shadows, waiting to add another face to its collection of memory, waiting to feed. Thank you for reading to the end. If you enjoyed this narrative, consider following for more immersive stories. What's your interpretation of Emily's fate? I'd love to read your theories in the comments. The radio crackled to life at 6:47 a.m., pulling Daniel from his second cup of coffee. Outside the ranger station window, dawn painted the Absaroka Range in shades of copper and ash. Base, this is dispatch. We have a code yellow. 16-year-old female last seen yesterday evening on Fairy Creek Trail. Family reported her missing at 06:30. Daniel set down his mug, the ceramic meeting wood with a hollow sound. Code yellow. Missing person. He'd worked Yellowstone for 12 years, and every code yellow carried the same weight. The same ticking clock that grew louder with each passing hour. Copy, dispatch. Details. Emily Morrison, Caucasian, 5'4", brown hair. Last contact was a text message to her mother at 17:34 hours yesterday. Said she was extending her hike to catch the sunset at Dragon's Mouth Spring. Daniel's hand tightened on the radio. His own daughter, Claire, was 16. Last week, she'd asked to go hiking with friends. He'd said yes, then spent the entire day checking his phone. Weather conditions yesterday evening? He asked. Clear until approximately 1900 hours. Temperature dropped to 41 degrees by 2000. No precipitation. Not cold enough for immediate hypothermia, but October nights in Yellowstone could betray you. The park sat at 8,000 feet in most places, higher where Emily had been heading. I'm en route to Fairy Creek Trailhead. ETA 20 minutes. Request additional units. Copy. Rangers Patterson and Chen are 40 minutes out. Search and rescue team assembling now. Daniel grabbed his pack, already loaded with first aid supplies, emergency blanket, water purification tablets, protein bars, and flares. His Garmin GPS went into his left pocket, Motorola radio clipped to his belt. He checked his Benchmade knife, his headlamp batteries, his backup radio batteries. 12 years had taught him that preparation bought you options when everything else failed. The drive to Fairy Creek took him past the Norris Geyser Basin, where sulfur plumes rose like ancient prayers into the morning air. The park was waking, elk moving through meadows, ravens circling thermals, the sun climbing over peaks that had witnessed 10,000 years of human passage. Emily's parents were waiting at the trailhead parking lot, standing beside a silver Honda Pilot. The father paced. The mother sat on the rear bumper, phone pressed to her ear, her free hand covering her eyes. Daniel pulled up, and the father rushed over before he'd even killed the engine. Are you the ranger? Are you going to find her? The man's voice carried that particular strain of panic barely held in check, the sound of someone whose world had tilted 90 degrees overnight. I'm Ranger Daniel Cooper. I'm going to do everything I can. Daniel extended his hand, kept his voice level and calm. Panic was contagious. You're Emily's father? Mark Morrison. That's my wife, Jennifer. Mark gestured to the woman, who had lowered her phone and was walking toward them. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but dry. Past tears, into the numb space beyond. Tell me about yesterday, Daniel said. What time did Emily start her hike? Jennifer answered, her voice surprisingly steady. 2:30. She wanted to photograph the hot springs. She's really into photography. She's applying to art schools next year. The present tense hung in the air between them. She promised to be back by 7. When she wasn't back by 8, we called the park service. Did she hike alone often? Sometimes. She's experienced. We've been coming here since she was 8. Mark pulled out his phone, showed Daniel a photo. A girl with long brown hair and her mother's eyes, smiling on a mountaintop. She knows to stay on trails. She always checks in. What did her last message say exactly? Jennifer pulled up her text messages, handed the phone to Daniel. The last text read, "Mom," extending to Dragon's Mouth. "Sunset here is going to be incredible. Home by dark. Love you." Sent at 5:34 p.m. Nothing after. Has she responded to any messages since? No. We've sent dozens. Her phone goes straight to voicemail now. Dead battery or no signal. Fairy Creek Trail wound through some of the park's most remote terrain. Cell coverage was theoretical at best. I need you both to stay here, Daniel said. More rangers are coming. If Emily makes her way back, we need someone here. Can you do that? Mark opened his mouth to protest, but Jennifer put a hand on his arm. We'll stay. Please find our daughter. Daniel nodded, shouldered his pack, and started up the trail. Fairy Creek Trail began gently, a wide path through lodgepole pine forest, well-maintained and clearly marked. Morning light filtered through the canopy in dusty shafts, illuminating patches of frost that hadn't yet surrendered to the sun. Daniel moved at a steady pace, eyes scanning the trail for any sign of passage. Footprints in the damp earth near a small creek. A granola bar wrapper caught in brush. He checked the brand. Didn't match what the Morrison said Emily carried. The trail markers appeared every quarter mile, bright yellow blazes on tree trunks. Daniel called out every few minutes, "Emily, this is Park Ranger Cooper. If you can hear me, make noise." Only the wind answered, moving through the pines with a sound like distant water. At the 2-mile mark, the trail forked, left toward Dragon's Mouth Spring, Emily's stated destination. Right toward the higher elevations in the backcountry areas that required permits. Daniel examined the fork carefully. The left path showed recent foot traffic. The right path should have been empty this late in the season, but something made him look closer. There, in the soft dirt, the tread pattern of a hiking boot, no more than a day old, heading right. Daniel pulled out his radio. "Base, this is Cooper. I'm at the 2-mile fork. Found fresh tracks heading toward the backcountry area, not toward Dragon's Mouth." "Copy, Cooper. Backcountry permits for that sector?" "Checking now." Daniel pulled out his GPS, cross-referenced the permit log he'd loaded that morning. "Negative. No active permits for this area." Could be Emily went off trail? Possible. But it didn't fit. Experienced hikers didn't deviate from their stated plans without reason. "I'm following the tracks." The right-hand trail climbed more steeply, switchbacking through dense forest. The temperature dropped as Daniel gained elevation, his breath beginning to fog, his fingers going numb where they gripped his trekking poles. And then he saw it. A tree, massive and ancient, growing at an odd angle from the hillside. Its trunk was easily 6 feet in diameter, bark scarred by centuries of lightning and wind. But that wasn't what made Daniel stop. Someone had carved symbols into the bark, not the casual vandalism of initials in hearts, but deliberate marks. Geometric patterns that spiraled around the trunk in a language Daniel didn't recognize. The cuts were old, decades at least, weathered but still visible. He'd worked this park for 12 years and had never seen this tree. Daniel keyed his radio. "Base, I'm at grid reference." He checked his GPS, frowned. The screen showed his position, but the topographic map had gone blank around his location, replaced by static gray. "Stand by, I'm having GPS issues." He tapped the screen, power cycled the device. When it came back on, the map had returned, but his position marker was blinking erratically. Electromagnetic interference from the geothermal activity, probably. Yellowstone sat on a supervolcano. The ground beneath his feet was laced with magma chambers and mineral deposits that could play hell with electronics. Daniel photographed the tree with his phone. At least that was still working, and continued up the trail. The footprints continued. Boot size looked right for a teenage girl. Stride pattern suggested someone moving with purpose, not wandering lost. But why this direction? At the 3-mile mark, Daniel noticed the first dead bird. It lay in the center of the trail, a raven, wings spread as if it had fallen from the sky mid-flight. No visible injuries, no sign of predation, just dead. 10 yards further, another raven, same condition, then a third. Daniel had seen birds die from West Nile virus, from collisions with windows, from poisoning, but never like this. Never arranged in a line, each exactly the same distance from the next. He photographed them, continued walking. The forest had gone quiet. No bird calls, no squirrel chatter, just wind and the sound of his own breathing. Daniel's radio crackled. "Cooper, this is Patterson. We're at the trailhead with the family. What's your status?" 3 miles in, following tracks into the backcountry. Found some unusual markers. Dead birds, old carvings on a tree. I think Emily came this way. Dead birds? What do you mean? Ravens. 3 of them. Spaced evenly on the trail. No apparent cause of death. Silence on the other end, then... "Cooper, you need backup?" Did he? Daniel looked ahead. The trail continued to climb, disappearing into a section of forest so dense that the canopy blocked most of the light. His instincts, honed by 12 years of wilderness work and 16 years of fatherhood, were sending up warning flares. But Emily was out here somewhere, and he was losing daylight. Negative. Continue organizing the main search party. I'll report back in 30 minutes. Copy. Be careful. Daniel pressed forward. The trail narrowed, becoming little more than a game path winding between ancient pines. The air changed. Colder, yes, but also heavier somehow, pressing against Daniel's chest like a physical weight. His breath came faster than the elevation warranted, and then the trees opened into a clearing Daniel had never seen on any map. It was roughly circular, maybe 50 yards across, ringed by pines so old their lowest branches had died and fallen away, leaving bare trunks that rose like cathedral columns. In the center of the clearing stood a formation of rocks, not natural, but arranged deliberately in a spiral pattern that reminded Daniel uncomfortably of the symbols on the tree. At the center of the spiral, a backpack, blue, covered in pins and patches. Daniel approached carefully, scanning the surrounding forest. "Emily, can you hear me?" No response. He knelt beside the backpack, pulled on his gloves before opening it. Inside, a Nikon camera, 3 water bottles, trail mix, a first aid kit, a journal, and a phone. He pressed the phone's power button. Dead. The journal's last entry was dated yesterday, 5:15 p.m. Came across the most incredible place. Off trail. I know, Mom would kill me. But I saw what looked like a path and followed it. There's this clearing with these stones arranged in a pattern. Light is perfect. Getting shots that are going to blow away my portfolio reviewers. Just a few more minutes, then I'll head back. No more entries. Daniel stood, turned slowly, examining the clearing. Emily's boot prints were everywhere, circling the rocks, moving to different angles, backing up for wider shots. But there was something wrong with the pattern. The prints didn't lead out of the clearing. They circled and circled, then stopped. Right at the edge of the stone spiral, last print facing inward. No prints leading away. Daniel's radio crackled with static. Then a voice emerged, distorted, barely comprehensible. "Cooper, report." "Patterson, I found Emily's backpack and phone. Grid reference." He checked his GPS again. Still malfunctioning, the screen now showing coordinates that placed him somewhere in the middle of Yellowstone Lake. "I'm in a clearing approximately 4 miles from the trailhead, bearing northeast. The tracks stop here. No sign of Emily." "Copy. We're 40. Out." The signal degraded into pure static. Daniel tried again. Nothing. He was alone. The sun had climbed higher, but the clearing remained in shadow, the trees positioned such that direct light never quite reached the ground. The temperature continued to drop. Daniel could see his breath now in thick plumes. If this story is gripping you, follow for more quality content. What would you do in Daniel's situation? Share your thoughts. He began a systematic search of the clearing, moving in expanding circles from the backpack, looking for blood, for torn clothing, for any sign of struggle or injury. But the ground was undisturbed except for Emily's footprints. It was as if she'd simply vanished. Daniel photographed everything: the backpack, the stones, the boot prints, the surrounding trees. Evidence, documentation, the foundations of search and rescue work. But evidence didn't explain why the temperature in this clearing was at least 15 degrees colder than the surrounding forest. Why his GPS couldn't lock onto his position. Why his radio had stopped working entirely. Why he felt watched. Daniel turned, scanning the tree line. Nothing moved, but the feeling persisted. A pressure between his shoulder blades, a certainty that something was observing him with patient, ancient awareness. "You're trained for this," he muttered to himself. "Adrenaline. Stress response. You're projecting." But his hands were shaking, and not from the cold. A branch cracked in the forest behind him. Daniel spun, hand dropping to the canister of bear spray on his belt. "Emily, is that you?" Another crack. Closer. "This is Park Ranger Cooper. Identify yourself." Movement between the trees. A shadow that might have been a person, might have been nothing. Then a voice, faint, female. "Help, please, Emily." Daniel moved toward the voice, stepping carefully through the underbrush. "Emily, keep talking, I'm coming to you." "Help, I can't move." The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Daniel's training warred with his instincts, never rushed toward an unclear situation. But Emily needed help, needed him now. He pushed through a stand of young pines and emerged into another clearing, smaller than the first. Empty. "Emily?" No response. Daniel's heart hammered against his ribs. He'd heard her. She'd been right here. "Help!" The voice came from behind him now, back toward the stone spiral. Daniel spun, started back the way he'd come, and stopped. The trees had changed, not dramatically, not in ways he could point to and say, "This is different." But the angles were wrong. The spacing wasn't what he'd just walked through. The path he'd taken to get here had disappeared. "Okay," Daniel said aloud, forcing his voice to remain calm. "Okay, you're disoriented. Happens in dense forest, just retrace your steps." He pulled out his compass. The needle spun lazily, refusing to settle. His GPS was still useless. His radio was dead. And the sun, which should have been in the southeastern sky, seemed to be shining from the north. Daniel closed his eyes, breathed deeply. Panic killed people in the wilderness. Panic made you run when you should sit, made you abandon your pack, made you do the exact wrong thing at the exact wrong moment. He had water, he had supplies, he had training. He could figure this out. When he opened his eyes, a woman stood 10 feet away. Daniel's breath caught. She was young, maybe 20, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt that looked decades out of style. Her feet were bare despite the cold. Her hair was long and dark, tangled with pine needles and moss. "Who are you?" Daniel asked. "Are you lost?" The woman tilted her head, studying him with eyes that didn't quite focus. "You shouldn't be here. I'm looking for a missing girl, Emily Morrison. Have you seen her?" "They all come looking." The woman's voice was soft, almost kind. "Fathers, brothers, rangers, they all come looking when someone goes missing." "You've seen other searchers? When?" "Time doesn't work the same here." She smiled, and Daniel noticed her teeth were too white, too perfect. "This is his place, the Guardian's territory. You've trespassed." "Guardian?" Daniel kept his voice level, professional, even as alarm bells screamed in his head. "I don't understand." "The stones. The markers, the warnings. The woman gestured back toward where the spiral should be. They're not decoration. They're boundaries, the old boundaries, before roads and rangers and people who think they can walk wherever they please. Daniel thought of the carved tree, the dead ravens, the arranged stones. Warnings. Where is Emily? Where they all go. Into the earth. Into the roots. Into the guardian's keeping. The woman stepped closer. He protects this place. From those who would defile it. From those who take without permission. Emily's 16 years old. She took some photographs. That doesn't deserve. She crossed the boundary. The woman's eyes flashed with something that might have been anger or pity. Just as you have. Just as I did, 47 years ago. 47 years. This woman was maybe 20. Daniel's rational mind was screaming that this was impossible, that he was hallucinating from altitude or stress or carbon monoxide from the thermal vents. But his instincts, the ones that had kept him alive through 12 years of wilderness work, were screaming louder. Run. If I leave now, Daniel said carefully, if I go back across the boundary, will he let me go? If you leave alone. The woman's smile was sad. But you won't. None of them ever do. Emily's parents are waiting for her. I know, mine were too. For years, probably. Until they forgot. Until they moved on. Until I became just another missing person, just another case file in a dusty box somewhere. Daniel thought of Mark and Jennifer Morrison standing in the parking lot, of the photo of Emily on the mountaintop, of his own daughter Claire who texted him this morning. Love you, Dad. Be safe. I can't leave her, he said. The woman nodded as if she'd expected this. Then you'll have to face him, at sunset, where the stones meet the old tree. That's when he manifests. That's when he judges. Judges what? Whether you deserve to leave. The woman began to fade, not dramatically, but the way morning fog burns off, gradual and inevitable. Daniel stepped forward, reaching out, but his hand passed through empty air. He was alone again. Daniel stood in the clearing for a full minute, forcing himself to think. Option 1. He was experiencing a medical emergency. Stroke, seizure, altitude sickness causing hallucinations, in which case he needed to activate his emergency beacon and wait for rescue. Option 2. Something was happening here that he didn't understand. Something that existed outside the boundaries of his training and experience. In which case, Emily needed help and he was the only one in position to provide it. Daniel checked his watch. 2:47 p.m. Sunset would be around 6:30, less than 4 hours. He shouldered Emily's backpack along with his own and began moving through the forest trying to find the stone spiral again. But the clearing had vanished, replaced by identical stands of lodgepole pine in every direction. After 20 minutes of searching, Daniel admitted he was lost. He sat on a fallen log, pulled out his water bottle, and forced himself to drink. Then he opened Emily's journal, flipping through pages of sketches and notes. Emily had talent. Her drawings of landscapes and wildlife showed real skill. Near the back, he found entries dated over the past week. October 12th. Dad's been weird about this trip. Keeps checking his phone. Mom says he's always like this when I go anywhere. I get it, but I'm not a kid anymore. October 13th. Researched some of the areas we'll hit. Found old forum posts about strange phenomena near Ferry Creek. Hikers reporting disorientation, equipment failure, weird feelings of being watched. One guy claimed he saw a guardian spirit. Probably just bear encounters people misinterpreted. Still kind of adds to the mystique. October 14th. Tomorrow we head out. I'm going to get shots that'll blow away the admissions committee. This is my chance to show what I can do. Daniel felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. Emily had known. Not the specifics, but she'd known something was off about this area, and she'd come anyway, just like he had. A sound pulled him from his thoughts, chanting or maybe singing, distant and echoing. Daniel followed it through the forest, pushing through dense underbrush that left scratches on his hands and face. The singing grew louder, resolving into words in a language he didn't know. Old words. Words that felt wrong in his ears, like they predated English by thousands of years. He emerged into yet another clearing, this one dominated by the tree he'd seen earlier, the one with the spiral carvings. But it was different now, larger. The carvings glowed faintly with a phosphorescence that had nothing to do with sunlight. And at the base of the tree sat Emily. She was alive. Daniel could see her breathing, see her eyes moving beneath closed lids. But she wasn't conscious. She sat with her back against the trunk, hands palm up on her thighs, positioned as if meditating. "Emily," Daniel rushed forward, dropping to his knees beside her. "Emily, can you hear me?" Her eyes snapped open. Empty, white. No iris, no pupil. "Emily." "She cannot hear you." The voice came from Emily's mouth but wasn't hers. It was deeper, older, carrying harmonics that made Daniel's teeth ache. "She is held. She is judged. She is found wanting. Let her go." Daniel kept his voice firm despite the terror racing through his veins. "She's a child. She didn't know. Ignorance is not innocence." Emily's body remained perfectly still, but the voice seemed to come from all around. The boundaries were marked. The warnings were given. She chose to cross. She chose to take. Photographs. She took photographs. Images steal essence. Capture steals freedom. She took without offering. She trespassed without permission. Daniel thought fast, reaching for anything that might work. "Then let me offer. Let me make amends on her behalf." Silence. Then, "What could you offer that would balance the scales? What do you want?" "The same thing I have wanted for 10,000 years. Protection, preservation. This place to remain untouched, unspoiled, sacred." Daniel looked at Emily, at her empty eyes and slack expression, thought of her parents in the parking lot, of his own daughter at home. "If I promise to protect this place," Daniel said, "to ensure it remains undisturbed, will you release her?" "You cannot make such a promise. You are one man. The rangers come and go. The tourists flood through every summer. The roads expand. The boundaries shrink. In another 100 years, this clearing will be a parking lot. The tree will be lumber. I will be forgotten. Then what do you want from me?" A pause. When the voice came again, it was quieter, almost sad. "I want to be remembered." Daniel frowned. "What?" "I am the last. The others have faded. Their territories paved over. Their names forgotten. I remain because this place remains. But for how much longer? When I fade, who will protect these woods? Who will keep the sacred ground sacred?" An idea formed in Daniel's mind. Crazy, probably wouldn't work, but it was all he had. "Let me take Emily home," he said, "and I'll tell your story. I'll make sure people know about this place, about the guardian who protects it. I'll make sure you're remembered." Words fade, stories change, truth becomes legend, becomes myth, becomes nothing. "Not if I do it right." Daniel pulled out Emily's camera from her backpack, held it up. "Emily came here to capture images. Let me capture yours. Let me document this place. I'll submit reports. I'll recommend this area be designated protected wilderness. No development, no roads, no parking lots. Ever. Your story will be part of the official record." The silence stretched so long that Daniel thought he'd failed. Then Emily gasped, her eyes rolling back to normal, color flooding back into her face. She slumped forward and Daniel caught her. "Easy, easy. I've got you." "Ranger? Cooper?" Emily's voice was hoarse. What happened?" "Long story. Can you walk?" She nodded weakly. The voice came one last time, not from Emily now, but from the tree itself. "You have made a promise, Daniel Cooper. I will hold you to it." "I know. And if you break it?" Daniel looked up at the carved tree, at the symbols glowing in the fading afternoon light. "Then I guess you'll come find me." A sound that might have been laughter or might have been wind. "Go. While the path remains open, do not return, do not send others. This place is marked. This place is mine. Remember." Daniel helped Emily to her feet, supporting her weight as they stumbled away from the tree. The forest seemed to shift around them, paths appearing where none had been moments before. His GPS suddenly locked on, showing the trail clear as day. They walked in silence for 20 minutes, Emily gradually regaining her strength. Finally, she spoke. Did I imagine all of that? I don't think so. What was it?" Daniel thought about how to answer, settled on truth. "Something old, something that was here before us, something that'll be here after. My camera, I have it. We'll get you home." Emily stopped walking, turned to face him. Tears were streaming down her face. "I thought I was going to die. I felt myself sinking into the ground, into roots, into dark, and I couldn't scream, couldn't move, couldn't do anything but feel myself disappearing." Daniel pulled her into a hug, something he'd never done with a stranger before. But Emily wasn't a stranger. She was someone's daughter, and right now she needed a father. "You're okay. You're safe. I've got you." They reached the trailhead as the sun touched the western peaks. Mark and Jennifer Morrison ran toward them, Jennifer's sob of relief audible across the parking lot. Daniel watched the family reunion, the tears, the desperate hugs, the 1,000 questions Emily couldn't really answer. He stood apart, giving them space, and pulled out his phone. One bar of signal. He opened his photos, scrolled through the images he'd taken. The carved tree, the stone spiral, the dead ravens, evidence, documentation, a promise to keep, epilogue. 3 months later, Daniel sat in the Yellowstone National Park Superintendent's office presenting his findings. "Based on my investigation and survey of the area in question," he said, gesturing to the maps spread across the desk, "I'm recommending that the region around Fairy Creek Trail, specifically the backcountry area beginning at grid reference 44.7234 degree RAN, 110.5983 degree W, be designated as protected sacred territory, with no public access permitted." The superintendent frowned. "That's a significant area, Cooper. And we've never had issues there before." "We've had 17 disappearances in that sector over the past 50 years, Daniel countered, pulling out the research he'd compiled. "More than any comparable area in the park. The terrain is unstable. There are unmapped geothermal features, high concentrations of volcanic gases that can cause disorientation and hallucinations. It's a safety hazard." 17 disappearances? Daniel nodded. He'd found them all. Missing person reports going back to 1965, including a 20-year-old woman named Sarah Chen, who'd vanished in 1968 while hiking alone. Her case had never been solved. The superintendent studied the reports, then looked up at Daniel. "You really think this area is that dangerous?" "I know it is." The designation went through in April 2016. The section of forest containing the carved tree and stone spiral was officially closed to public access. Signs were posted, maps were updated, and Daniel filed his report in the park's archives documenting everything he'd seen. Everything except the part he couldn't prove. Emily Morrison went to art school. Her photographs from Yellowstone, the ones taken before she crossed the boundary, won awards. She never spoke publicly about what happened in the clearing, but she sent Daniel a message every October 15th. "Thank you." And Daniel, on quiet nights when he couldn't sleep, would sometimes think about the woman in the clearing, about Sarah Chen, 20 years old forever, stuck in a moment, 47 years old, about the voice that had spoken of loneliness and fading, about the promise he'd made. The park kept growing. More tourists every year, more roads, more development. But that one sector remained untouched, sacred, protected, remembered. Daniel retired in 2022 after 28 years with the Park Service. On his last day, He hiked to the boundary of the protected zone, not crossing, never crossing, and left a small offering at the nearest trail marker. A bundle of sage, a handful of tobacco. The way the old rangers had taught him. The way guardians deserved to be honored. The wind moved through the trees with a sound like distant singing, and Daniel Cooper walked away, his promise kept, carrying the weight of what he knew and could never fully explain. Some places weren't meant for everyone. Some places needed protecting. Some places remembered. Thank you for reading to the end. If you enjoyed this narrative, consider following for more engaging stories. What's your interpretation of Emily's fate? I'd love to read your theories in the comments. The radio crackled to life at 5:47 a.m., pulling Michael Reeves from the half-sleep he'd learned to master over 15 years of ranger work. Not quite awake, never fully unconscious, the state of perpetual readiness that came with the territory. Dispatch to Reeves, we have a code yellow, Ho sector. Michael's hand found the transmitter before his eyes fully opened. Code yellow. Missing person. He swung his legs out of bed, already calculating. September in the Ho rainforest meant unpredictable weather, early darkness, and tourists who thought a mile hike qualified them for backcountry exploration. Reeves here. Details? Female, 28, solo researcher. Emily Hartwell. Last contact 18 hours ago. Family's en route from Seattle. The name hit Michael like a physical thing. Hartwell. He hadn't heard that name in 3 years, not since Tom Hartwell's retirement party. Tom, who'd taught Michael everything worth knowing about the Olympic wilderness during his first years on the job. Tom, whose daughter had been 12 years old the last time Michael saw her, gap-toothed and curious about every plant specimen her father brought home. Send me the coordinates, Michael said, his voice steady despite the sudden weight in his chest. I'll be on the trail in 20 minutes. The pre-dawn darkness pressed against his cabin windows as he moved through the familiar routine. Wool-based layers. Moisture-wicking synthetic was fine for day hikes, but wool kept you warm even when soaked. His Garmin GPS fully charged, the Motorola radio, backup batteries, first aid kit with thermal blankets, water purification tablets, emergency beacon, headlamp with fresh batteries plus 2 spares. His Bear Grylls knife, despite the ironic name, was the most reliable tool he'd ever carried. Protein bars, trail mix, energy gels. He paused at the cabinet where he kept the less routine equipment. 15 years meant he'd seen enough to know that preparedness came in layers. He added paracord, waterproof matches, and, after a moment's hesitation, the flare gun. The weight of it in his pack felt both reassuring and ominous. The drive to the Ho River trailhead took 40 minutes on roads still slick with yesterday's rain. Michael's headlights cut through wisps of fog that moved across the pavement like something alive, something searching. He'd driven these roads countless times, knew every switchback and pothole, but this morning they felt different. The darkness seemed thicker somehow, more resistant to penetration. His phone buzzed as he pulled into the empty parking area, a text from dispatch with the attached file on Emily Hartwell. He opened it, though he wasn't sure he wanted to. The photo showed a young woman with her father's eyes, that same sharp intelligence, that same stubborn set to the jaw. She was smiling, holding up some kind of moss sample, her auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. The caption read, Dr. Emily Hartwell, Field Research, University of Washington Botany Department. Dr. Hartwell. Of course, Tom's daughter had become a scientist. Michael remembered her endless questions, the way she'd examined every leaf and rock with the intensity of someone decoding ancient languages. The report was brief. Emily had been conducting research on old-growth ecosystem recovery in the Ho rainforest's northeast sector. She'd established a base camp near the junction of the Mount Olympus Trail and the Ho River Trail, approximately 8.3 miles from the trailhead. Her last communication had been a text message to her research partner at 11:34 a.m. yesterday. Found something strange near the old Sitka. Worth documenting, signal spotty. Will update tomorrow. No update had come. Michael shouldered his pack, 43 pounds he estimated, well within his comfortable range, and started up the trail. His headlamp beam caught the wooden sign. Ho River Trail, Mount Olympus, 17.5 miles. Below it, someone had carved words that the Park Service kept meaning to sand off. Respect the old places. The trail began as it always did, cutting through a tunnel of vegetation so dense it created its own microclimate. Even in September, the Ho rainforest maintained its essential character, a world where green dominated every surface, where moss grew on moss, where the air itself seemed thick with growth. Michael's boots found their rhythm on the packed earth, avoiding the network of roots that could turn an ankle if you let your attention drift. At 6:42 a.m., the sun began its attempt at penetration, but in the Ho, sunrise was more concept than event. Light filtered down through the canopy in diffuse greenish shafts that moved and shifted with every breath of wind. Michael had hiked this trail in every season, every weather condition, and he'd never quite shaken the feeling that the forest was aware of him. Not hostile exactly, but attentive. The first mile passed in that meditative state that long-distance hiking induced. His mind divided itself, part focused on the immediate, foot placement, breathing rhythm, the slight adjustment in pack straps, while another part ran scenarios. Solo hiker, experienced enough to be doing research in the backcountry. Last known position 8 miles in. That something strange in her message could mean anything from an interesting fungal growth to an unexpected geological formation. Emily was a scientist. Strange might just mean scientifically noteworthy. But the silence bothered him. 18 hours without contact. In 2018, even in the backcountry, people found ways to communicate if they could. Emily would know her family would worry. She would know protocols. At mile 3, Michael stopped to check his GPS and consult the topographic map he'd printed before leaving. Emily's base camp coordinates placed her just off the main trail, near a grove of Sitka spruce that had somehow survived the various floods and storms that periodically reshaped the Ho Valley. The elevation was modest, only about 700 feet above sea level, but the terrain between here and there included 2 creek crossings that could be problematic if the water was running high. He took a long drink from his hydration bladder and keyed his radio. Reeves to dispatch, approximately 3 miles in, making good time. How's the weather forecast looking? Static, then. Dispatch here. Front moving in faster than predicted. You've got maybe 24 hours before the access roads become problematic. Search and rescue is mobilizing, but won't be on site until 1400 hours. 1400 hours. 6 hours from now. Michael looked up at the canopy, where the light had taken on a peculiar quality, too yellow, too thick. The air pressure felt wrong against his eardrums. Copy that, he said. I'll have preliminary intel before SAR arrives. The trail steepened gradually, climbing alongside the Ho River's endless conversation with itself. Michael had always appreciated rivers. They were honest in their constancy, predictable in their moods. But this morning, the sound seemed off. The usual rhythmic tumble of water over stone contained pauses, irregular silences that made him stop and listen, trying to identify what bothered him. Nothing. That was the problem. Nothing. The forest should have been alive with morning sounds, varied thrushes calling, Douglas squirrels chattering their territorial disputes, the rustle of winter wrens in the undergrowth. Instead, there was only the river, and even that seemed muted. Michael had learned to trust these moments of wrongness. They were data points even if he couldn't yet interpret them. He marked the location on his GPS, 4.2 miles from trailhead, 0637 hours, anomalous silence, and continued. The first creek crossing came at mile 5. Spring Creek, normally a modest flow easily managed by hopping across the scattered stones. But yesterday's rain had swollen it to twice its usual volume, and the water moved with aggressive intent. Michael studied the crossing for a full minute before selecting his route. The rocks were slick with moss and spray, the kind of conditions that accounted for more rescue calls than any actual wildlife encounters. He unclipped his pack's waist belt. If he went in, he wanted to be able to shed the weight quickly, and started across. The water pulled at his boots with each step, trying to unbalance him. Halfway across, his left foot slipped on algae-slicked stone, and for a moment he felt the pull of the current. the eager invitation to join the water's journey downstream. But 15 years of experience had taught his body the micro-adjustments, the slight lean that counteracted momentum. He regained his footing and completed the crossing. On the far bank, he stood for a moment, breathing harder than the physical exertion warranted. The silence persisted. Not even the sound of his own splashing had disturbed anything into vocalization. He pressed on, and the trail narrowed. This section required attention. Roots crisscrossed the path, and several massive nurse logs had fallen across the trail since his last patrol 3 weeks ago. He climbed over them, his hands finding purchase on moss-covered bark that compressed under his grip, releasing the smell of decay and growth simultaneously. At 8:15 a.m., he reached the junction where the Mount Olympus Trail split off from the Hoh River route. Emily's coordinates placed her camp approximately 400 yards northeast of this junction, in an area off-trail, but accessible if you knew where the game trails threaded through the underbrush. Michael paused to drink again and eat a protein bar. Standard protocol: maintain energy levels, stay hydrated, keep the mind sharp. But the food tasted like cardboard in his mouth, and the water sat uneasily in his stomach. He was stalling, he realized, putting off the moment when he'd have to leave the established trail and enter the deeper forest, which was ridiculous. He'd gone off-trail hundreds of times. It was part of the job. But this morning, something in him resisted. He forced himself to shoulder the pack and step off the trail, consulting his GPS to maintain his bearing. The vegetation closed around him immediately, transforming the experience from hiking to bushwhacking. He pushed through salal bushes and ducked under low-hanging hemlock branches, his progress slowing to perhaps half a mile per hour. The forest here was primordial. These were trees that had been saplings when the Declaration of Independence was signed. Their trunks measured 15-20 feet in diameter, their lowest branches starting 60 feet above the forest floor. Between them, younger trees fought for the scattered light, and beneath those the understory created layers of shadow that never fully dissipated even at noon. Michael's GPS showed him closing in on Emily's coordinates. 100 yards, 75, 50. That's when he saw the first mark. It was carved into the bark of a massive Sitka spruce, about chest height. Not a carving exactly. More like something had been scraped or scratched into the tree, removing bark to expose the lighter wood beneath. The pattern was geometric but irregular, like a symbol from a language that existed just beyond comprehension. Michael had seen plenty of tree damage in his years. Bear scratches, elk rubs, vandalism from visitors who thought their initials deserved permanent memorialization. This was none of those things. The marks were too deliberate, too precise, and too fresh. The exposed wood still showed moisture, suggesting this had been done within the last day or two. He photographed it with his phone, though the image captured only a fraction of the strangeness he felt standing before it. Then he noticed the second mark, on a tree 15 feet to his left, and a third, beyond that. They formed a rough perimeter. Emily? His voice seemed absurdly loud in the silence. Emily Hartwell? It's Michael Reeves, Park Service. I'm here to help. The forest absorbed his words without response. He pushed forward, following the GPS coordinates, and emerged into a small clearing where the old growth had created a gap in the canopy. Morning light fell here with unusual clarity, illuminating Emily's camp. The tent was high quality, a North Face model designed for serious backcountry use. It stood properly staked, rainfly secured, no obvious damage. Her gear was organized outside. A camp stove on a flat rock, cooking supplies in a bear-proof canister properly sealed, a water filter hanging from a branch. Everything exactly as it should be. Everything except Emily. Dr. Hartwell? Michael called again, knowing it was futile but following protocol. Emily? He approached the tent slowly, noting details. The entrance was zipped shut. No signs of struggle, no blood, no torn fabric, no scattered equipment that might suggest a panicked departure. He unzipped the tent and looked inside. Her sleeping bag lay neatly arranged, unoccupied. Her research journal sat open on a waterproof stuff sack, her handwriting precise and scientific. Michael didn't touch it. This was potentially a crime scene now, but he could read the last entry from where he crouched. September 13th, 10:45 hours. Continuing documentation of Sitka spruce Namiavor 47. Unusual growth patterns in moss colonization suggest disruption event approximately 15-20 years ago. Local wildlife notably absent from this sector. No bird calls, no signs of deer or elk, despite ideal browse. Thermal anomalies noted on... The entry ended mid-sentence. Michael keyed his radio. Reeves to dispatch, I've located the camp. Tent and gear present and undisturbed. No sign of Dr. Hartwell. Requesting additional SAR units and forensic team. This is now a full search operation. Copy, Reeves. SR is 3 hours out. Do you require immediate support? Michael looked around the clearing. The marked trees formed their perimeter. The silence pressed down like physical weight. Every instinct he'd developed over 15 years was screaming that something here was profoundly wrong. Negative, he said. Because what else could he say? That the forest felt angry? That he could sense attention focused on him from between the trees? I'm going to establish a search pattern radiating from the camp. We'll report in 30 minutes. He carefully photographed Emily's camp from multiple angles, then began a systematic search. Standard protocol. Start at the last known position and work outward in expanding circles, looking for tracks, disturbed vegetation, anything that might indicate direction of travel. The ground was soft from recent rain, should have shown footprints clearly. But there was nothing. Emily had arrived here. The tent proved that. But if she'd left, she'd done so without leaving any trace. Michael found that impossible to accept. No one moved through the Hoh rainforest without leaving sign, unless they hadn't moved through it at all. Unless they'd been carried. He pushed that thought away and continued searching. 20 yards from camp, he found her day pack. It was propped against a tree, almost deliberately positioned. Inside, water bottle, empty. Energy bars, untouched. Camera, lens cap on. Field guide to Pacific Northwest flora. And her phone. Michael's hands were steady as he pressed the power button, but his pulse wasn't. The phone had 17% battery remaining. The screen showed 3 missed calls from a contact labeled Dad and multiple text messages from various numbers. He scrolled to Emily's last outgoing message, the one dispatch had mentioned. But there was another message below it, sent at 3:22 a.m. It's protecting something, I understand now. That was all. No follow-up, no clarification. Michael's thumb hovered over the message, reading it again and again, trying to extract meaning from 7 words. Protecting what? Understanding what? He bagged the phone as evidence and continued his search pattern. 50 yards from camp, he found the second anomaly. A perfect circle of dead vegetation. The ferns and undergrowth within a roughly 10-foot diameter had withered. Their green turned to brown and black. The soil beneath felt wrong, too dry, too warm, as if something had baked the life out of it. Michael knelt at the edge of the circle and reached out to touch the dead ferns. They crumbled at his touch, disintegrating into powder that smelled of char and something else, something organic and unpleasant. He was standing to photograph the circle when he heard it. A sound. Finally, a sound. But not the sound he'd been hoping for. Not Emily calling for help or the rustle of rescue teams arriving early. This was something else entirely. A low, resonant note that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, as if the forest itself had found its voice. It wasn't wind. Michael knew wind through trees, knew every variation of that sound. This was deeper, more deliberate. It had pattern and purpose, and it was getting closer. Mid-story CTA. If this story is capturing your attention, follow for more quality content. What would you do in Michael's situation? Share your thoughts. Michael's training kicked in before his conscious mind fully processed the threat. He straightened, oriented himself toward camp, and started moving. Not running. Running invited panic, and panic invited mistakes, but walking with purpose, maintaining awareness of his surroundings. The sound followed. Or rather, it didn't follow so much as accompany him, matching his pace, maintaining distance. Now that he'd identified it, he could hear its texture. Not a single note, but multiple tones layered together. like distant voices or the harmonic resonance of wind through a cave system. Except there were no caves in this part of the Ho Valley. He reached Emily's camp and immediately felt better, which was irrational. A nylon tent offered no actual protection, but the human brain craved the illusion of shelter. He stood in the center of the clearing, turning slowly, trying to locate the source of the sound. It came from all directions and yet seemed to emanate from the trees themselves, from the marked trees that formed that perimeter. As he watched, a peculiar thing happened. The marks on the nearest tree seemed to shift. Not move exactly, but change depth, as if the shadows within them were rearranging themselves. Michael blinked hard. Fatigue, stress, the psychological weight of searching for Tom Hartwell's daughter. All of these could create sensory distortions. He'd learned that in his wilderness first aid training. The human mind, when stressed, could manufacture all kinds of perceptual anomalies. The sound stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse. It felt expectant, like the pause between lightning and thunder, the moment when you knew something was coming but couldn't yet see its shape. "I'm here to help Emily," Michael said aloud, feeling foolish, but also feeling the need to declare his purpose. "That's all. I'm not here to disturb anything. I just need to find her and make sure she's safe." His words disappeared into the forest without echo. He pulled out his radio. "Reeves to dispatch. I need an update on SAR Team ETA." Static. He adjusted the frequency, tried again. More static, but underneath it, was that the sound again? He couldn't tell. The static and the strange resonance seemed to merge, to become indistinguishable. Michael checked his watch. 9:47 a.m. His GPS showed his position clearly, showed Emily's camp coordinates, showed the trail back to civilization. All his technology functioned perfectly. There was no logical reason to feel this isolated, this disconnected. But he did. He forced himself to think methodically. Emily had been researching old-growth ecosystems. She'd noted thermal anomalies. She'd found something that was worth documenting. That meant she'd been moving with purpose, following a scientific question. Scientists didn't just vanish. They left trails of inquiry, breadcrumbs of investigation, her research journal. He'd read the last entry, but hadn't examined the earlier pages. Moving back to the tent, Michael carefully extracted the journal and began reading backwards, looking for context. September 12th. Entries detailed standard observations: moss growth rates, canopy cover percentages, soil pH readings. Nothing unusual. But September 11th showed a shift in tone. Local informant, A. Blackwater, Quinault Tribal Fisheries, mentioned historical significance of this grove. Stories of guardian spirit protecting old-growth sector from logging operations in 1970s. Several accidents involving logging equipment. 2 deaths attributed to falling trees under unclear circumstances. Operations ceased 1974. Interesting correlation with traditional Quinault territorial boundaries. This specific grove marked as sacred restricted area in pre-contact maps examined at Tribal Museum. Scientific interest. Is there something about this ecosystem that generated protective cultural mythology? Or did cultural protection preserve a unique ecosystem? Michael felt something shift in his understanding. Emily hadn't just stumbled into a random research site. She'd come here specifically, looking for the intersection between traditional knowledge and ecological science. The next page was more revealing. September 12th evening. Can't explain what I'm observing. Temperature fluctuations without corresponding weather patterns. Magnetic compass unreliable within the grove perimeter. Deviation of 15-20 degrees from GPS heading. Recording equipment experiencing unusual interference. Audio recordings from yesterday contain frequencies I can't identify. Below normal hearing range but detectable on spectrogram. This is either a natural phenomenon worth publishing, or I'm losing my scientific objectivity. Need to rule out equipment malfunction before drawing any conclusions. The final pages were loose sketches, Emily's attempt to map the marked trees to find pattern in their placement. And there was a pattern. Michael could see it now, looking at her careful rendering. The trees formed a spiral, beginning at the massive Sitka in the clearing's center and expanding outward in a mathematically precise curve. At the center of Emily's sketch, she'd written one word: Fibonacci. Michael understood enough mathematics to recognize the significance. The Fibonacci sequence appeared throughout nature, in nautilus shells, in flower petal arrangements, in the branching patterns of trees. But this was different. This was deliberate. The trees themselves were naturally occurring, centuries old, but the marks had been added to existing trees to complete a pattern that shouldn't exist. His radio crackled. Through the static, he heard Eves respond. "Your status? Dispatch, this is Reeves. Radio reception failing. Repeat, radio reception." The transmission died completely. Michael checked his phone. No signal, which wasn't unusual this deep in the forest. He tried the emergency beacon, watched it search for satellite connection. The LED blinked its pattern. Searching, searching, searching. The forest was isolating him. Whether through natural phenomenon or something else, he was being cut off. A branch snapped to his left. Michael turned, his hand moving instinctively to the bear spray on his hip. But what emerged from the undergrowth wasn't a bear. Emily Hartwell stood at the edge of the clearing, exactly where he'd entered an hour ago. Her clothes were soaked, clinging to her frame. Her auburn hair hung in wet tangles around her face, but she was alive, standing, apparently uninjured. "Emily?" Michael's voice came out rough with relief and confusion. "Are you hurt? We've been searching. Your family is worried." She didn't respond. She simply stood there 20 feet away, watching him with an expression he couldn't read. Her eyes seemed wrong somehow, too dark or too reflective or... "Emily, I'm Michael Reeves. I knew your father. I'm here to help you get back safely." She tilted her head in a gesture that was almost familiar, almost human, but not quite. Like someone imitating a human reaction without fully understanding it. "You need to come with me," Michael said, fighting the urge to approach her. Everything in his training said to close the distance, to make physical contact, to assess for injuries. But everything in his instinct said to maintain the gap between them. "There's a storm coming. We need to get you out of here." Emily's mouth opened, but the sound that emerged wasn't speech. It was that resonance again, that impossible harmonic that seemed to vibrate in his bones. The sound formed patterns, almost words, meanings that dissolved when he tried to grasp them. Michael took an involuntary step backward. The thing wearing Emily Hartwell's face smiled. "Oh God," Michael whispered, understanding flooding through him with terrible clarity. Emily's message, "It's protecting something, I understand now." She hadn't been referring to the forest protecting something. She'd been warning him that something was using protection as justification. The marks on the trees weren't warnings. They were a cage, a boundary, and Emily had crossed it, had violated sacred space with her scientific instruments and rational mind, and something had responded. The thing that looked like Emily took a step forward. Michael's hand found the flare gun in his pack, pulled it free. "Stay back." It took another step, its movements too fluid, lacking the small imperfections that made human motion human. "I don't want to hurt you," Michael said, knowing it was meaningless. Whatever stood before him, it wasn't Emily. Maybe it never had been. Maybe Emily was already gone, and this was just the forest's way of preventing further intrusion. "But I will defend myself." The sound came again, surrounding him, and this time he could almost understand. Not words, but meaning. Concepts that bypassed language entirely. Ancient, protected, violation, consequence. The marked trees seemed to pulse with dim light, or perhaps that was his oxygen-deprived brain creating patterns where none existed. Michael realized his breathing had gone shallow, rapid, hyperventilation. He forced himself to slow his respiration, to think clearly. The thing stepped closer. He could see details now that his mind had been refusing to process. The way water dripped from Emily's clothes but left no puddles. The way her feet didn't quite press down vegetation as she moved. The way her eyes reflected no light at all. just absorbed it into depths that shouldn't exist in human anatomy. "Where is she?" Michael demanded. "Where's Emily?" The response came not as sound, but as sensation. A pulling, a direction, an invitation to follow deeper into the forest beyond the spiral of marked trees, into the oldest growth where human feet had perhaps never tread. Michael understood the offer. Come see, come understand, come join. He raised the flare gun. The thing stopped, and for the first time, uncertainty crossed its borrowed features. "I'm leaving," Michael said, "and I'm coming back with others. We're going to find Emily Hartwell, or we're going to find what happened to her. You can't stop us all." The sound rose to a crescendo, became almost painful in its intensity. The trees seemed to lean inward, the clearing to shrink. Michael felt pressure building in his ears, his sinuses, as if the atmosphere itself was compressing around him. He pointed the flare gun skyward and fired. The bright magnesium flare arced up through the canopy, burning through leaves and branches, scattering light that seemed to offend the forest's essential darkness. For a moment, everything was illuminated in harsh red brilliance. The thing that wore Emily's form recoiled, its outline seeming to blur and distort in the artificial light. The sound stopped, and in that moment of silence and light, Michael ran. He crashed through the undergrowth without regard for stealth or navigation, trusting his sense of direction to guide him back toward the trail. Behind him, he heard something. Not pursuit, exactly, but presence, awareness. The forest noting his passage and considering its response. Branches tore at his face and pack. His boots found treacherous footing, slipping on moss and roots. He fell once, hard, the impact driving air from his lungs. But he forced himself up and kept moving, because stopping meant giving up, and he couldn't give up. Not on Emily. Not on Tom Hartwell's daughter. The trail emerged ahead, that packed earth path that represented civilization and safety, and the rational world he understood. Michael burst onto it and immediately felt better, felt the pressure ease, felt the attention that had been focused on him disperse. He kept running, covering ground at a pace his 15-year veteran body protested but maintained. 1 mile, 2. The forest around him remained silent, but it was a different silence now. Not oppressive, just quiet. At the 3-mile mark, his radio crackled to life. "Eves, respond. Reeves, please respond. Sayar is en route to your last known..." "Dispatch," Michael gasped into the radio. "This is Reeves. I'm mobile, heading back to Trailhead. Emily Hartwell's camp is located, but the situation is complicated. I need full SAR deployment, and I need..." What did he need? A priest? An anthropologist? Someone who could explain what he'd seen in terms that wouldn't end his career? "I need specialists," he finished. "Contact the Kinal Nation. Ask for anyone with knowledge of traditional territorial guardians. This is beyond standard search and rescue." There was a long pause, then, "Copy that, Reeves. Are you injured?" "Negative, but I'm not going back in there alone." The admission felt like failure, but it was also truth. Whatever existed in that spiral of marked trees, whatever had taken Emily or become Emily or was pretending to be Emily, Michael couldn't face it alone. He needed backup, needed witnesses, needed someone else to confirm that what he'd experienced was real. He reached the trailhead at 11:34 a.m. His truck sat exactly where he'd left it 6 hours ago, though it felt like days had passed. The normalcy of it, the parking area, the trailhead sign, the porta-potty that needed servicing, felt like a dream after the intensity of the forest's attention. Michael sat on his tailgate and drank water with shaking hands, trying to organize his thoughts into a coherent report. But how could he explain? Missing person, equipment found, thermal anomalies, marked trees forming mathematical patterns, and an entity wearing the missing woman's face like a costume. It sounded like psychosis, like the ramblings of someone who'd gotten lost and dehydrated and let fear override reason. But he knew what he'd seen, knew what he'd felt. A Park Service truck appeared on the access road, followed by 2 SAR vehicles. Michael watched them approach, watched the teams emerge. 12 people in total, all trained professionals he'd worked with before. Good people, competent people. They weren't going to be enough. Sarah Martinez, the SAR coordinator, approached him first. "Michael, you look like hell. Are you sure you're not injured?" "I'm fine. But Sarah, this one's different. I need you to listen to what I'm saying and not dismiss it as stress or exposure." She studied his face with concern. "Okay, tell me." So he did. He laid it out systematically. Emily's research into traditional guardian legends, the marked trees, the dead vegetation circle, the phone message, the thermal anomalies. He described finding the camp intact, the systematic isolation from communication, and finally, carefully, he described the encounter. "Something is in those woods," he said. "Whether it's a person or a group of people protecting something they consider sacred, or," he paused, knowing how the next words would sound, "or something else entirely, I don't know. But Emily Hartwell is either being held or she's been changed. And we're going to need more than standard SAR protocols to bring her home." Sarah didn't laugh, didn't dismiss him, which he appreciated. She simply nodded slowly. "The FBI has been notified because of the duration of the disappearance. They're sending someone. And I put in a call to Quinault Forestry like you asked. They're sending a liaison." "Good. That's good." Michael rubbed his face, felt the scrape of beard growth and dried sweat. "We need to approach this carefully, Sarah. That grove, there's something about it. Something that doesn't want to be disturbed." "Noted. But you know we have to go in." "I know, just let's wait for backup. Let's make sure we understand what we're dealing with before we commit people." The FBI agent arrived at 2:15 p.m., a woman in her 40s named Keiko Sato, who specialized in missing persons cases in wilderness areas. She interviewed Michael for an hour, recording every detail, asking precise questions about timelines and observations. To her credit, she never suggested he'd imagined anything. She simply gathered information. The Quinault liaison, a man named Thomas Blackwater, uncle to the informant Emily had mentioned in her journal, arrived shortly after. He was perhaps 60, with weathered features and eyes that seemed to measure Michael carefully before speaking. "You're a missing woman," Thomas said. "She came to our museum 2 weeks ago, asked about the old place in the Ho, the grove we don't go to anymore." "Why don't you go there?" Sarah asked. Thomas took his time answering. "My grandfather's grandfather told stories about that place. Said it's where the forest keeps its heart. Not a place for people, especially not for people who want to study it, measure it, explain it." He looked at Michael. "You went there. What did you feel?" Michael hesitated, then decided on honesty. "I felt watched, and I felt unwelcome, like I was somewhere I had no right to be." Thomas nodded. "The old ones say some places belong to themselves. We mark them, respect them, stay away. Your scientists want to understand everything, explain everything. Some things don't want to be explained. But Emily is still in there," Michael said. "Whatever the place is, whoever or whatever is protecting it, she's still a human being who deserves to be brought home to her family." "Is she?" Thomas asked quietly. The question hung in the air. Agent Sato cleared her throat. "Mr. Blackwater, are you saying you believe something supernatural has occurred?" "I'm saying what my people have always said. The forest is older than us, bigger than us, and it has its own ways. When someone violates sacred space, sometimes the space responds." "With all due respect," Sato said, her voice careful, "I need to investigate this as a potential abduction or medical emergency. I understand cultural sensitivities, but my job is to find Emily Hartwell and bring her home safely." "Then you should probably prepare yourself," Thomas said, "for the possibility that home is no longer where she belongs." The search team went in at 3:30 p.m., 12 people in 3 groups of 4. Michael led one group, Sarah another, Agent Sato the third. Thomas Blackwater came too, though he refused to carry standard SAR equipment, bringing instead a small pouch of what he called protective herbs and a carved wooden amulet. The forest seemed different with so many people. Less oppressive, perhaps, or maybe just divided in its attention. Michael led his group along the same route he'd taken that morning, pointing out landmarks, maintaining constant radio contact with the other teams. They reached Emily's camp at 5:15 p.m. The tent still stood undisturbed. Her gear remained exactly as Michael had found it, but the marked trees seemed darker now, their symbols deeper, more pronounced. Jesus Christ, breathed one of the SAR volunteers, a young woman named Rebecca Chen. Did someone do this today? They're the same as this morning, Michael said. I photographed them. He pulled out his phone to show her, but the photos wouldn't display. The image files showed as corrupted, unreadable. That's... Rebecca started, then stopped. My phone's not working either. No signal, and the GPS is showing our position as somewhere in the Pacific Ocean. One by one, the team checked their devices. Every phone, every GPS unit showed the same corruption. Only analog compasses worked, and even those spun lazily, unable to settle on magnetic north. Everyone stay close, Sarah ordered over the radio. We're experiencing equipment malfunctions. Maintain visual contact with your partners at all times. Thomas Blackwater stood at the edge of the clearing, looking at the marked trees with an expression Michael couldn't quite interpret. Not fear, exactly, but respect mixed with resignation. It's stronger than it was, Thomas said. The old place is waking up. What does that mean? Agent Sato asked. It means we should leave. Now, before full dark. But even as he said it, Michael saw movement at the far edge of the clearing, 3 figures emerging from the undergrowth, moving in that too fluid way he'd seen before. Emily Hartwell. And behind her, 2 others, a young man in hiking gear from perhaps a decade ago, and an elderly woman in clothing that looked even older. The 2012 disappearance, the 2003 disappearance, and possibly the 1987 disappearance, though the woman's age was impossible to determine with certainty. All 3 stood at the clearing's edge, watching the search team with expressions of identical calculation. Emily, Agent Sato called out. Emily Hartwell? I'm FBI Special Agent Sato. We're here to help you. The 3 figures didn't respond. They simply stood, and as Michael watched, he realized others were appearing between the trees. More figures, some more distinct than others, some barely outlines in the gathering dusk, all standing at that perimeter, all watching. This is wrong, Rebecca whispered. This is so wrong. Everyone back to the trail, Sarah ordered. Organized retreat, no one runs. Michael, take point. Thomas, bring up the rear. We're leaving. But the figures moved, and suddenly they weren't just at the perimeter anymore. They were closer, had somehow covered ground without anyone seeing them move, and they were forming a circle around the SAR team. Thomas began speaking in a language Michael didn't recognize. Quinault, probably. Words that flowed like water and resonated like the forest's own strange song. The figures paused, seemed to listen. Then Emily stepped forward, and when she opened her mouth, that same harmonic resonance emerged, but now it carried something approximating language. Protected, sacred, eternal. You cannot take what has been given. You cannot heal what chooses transformation. Leave. Final warning. Agent Sato drew her service weapon, which seemed both appropriate and utterly futile. Nobody is choosing anything against their will. If you're holding these people... The sound that interrupted her was like nothing Michael had heard before. The entire forest screaming in one voice, all frequencies at once, a wall of noise that drove the SAR team to their knees. Michael's hands went to his ears, but it did nothing to stop the assault. The sound was inside his head, vibrating in his skull, threatening to shake apart the basic architecture of thought. Then Thomas's voice cut through, still speaking in Quinault, and the sound diminished to bearable levels. He's negotiating, Sarah gasped. Thomas is negotiating with it. The exchange continued for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, Thomas speaking in measured tones, the forest responding with that terrible harmonic. Finally, Thomas turned to the team. It will allow us to leave, he said. But we cannot come back, and we cannot take them." He gestured to Emily and the others. "They are part of it now, part of the old place. They protect it, and it protects them." "That's not acceptable," Sato said, but her voice shook. "It's what's being offered," Thomas replied. "Take it or join them." Michael looked at the figures standing in their circle. Emily met his eyes, and for just a moment he thought he saw something of the real person beneath. Tom Hartwell's daughter, the curious 12-year-old who'd asked endless questions about forest ecology. Then the moment passed, and she was something else again. Something that existed in the space between human and wild. "I'm sorry," Michael said to her, to all of them. "I'm so sorry." Emily's mouth curved in something that might have been a smile. "Protected," she said, and this time it almost sounded like her own voice. "We protect what matters. We become what's needed. Tell my father. Tell him I understand now. I finally understand." The figures parted, creating a path back toward the trail. The message was clear: leave now, while the offer stands. Sarah made the call. "Everyone move. Organized retreat. Now." They walked backward, maintaining visual contact with the figures until the forest swallowed them, and the marked trees disappeared into gathering darkness. No one spoke. No one broke protocol. They simply moved, step by careful step, until the trail appeared beneath their feet and the oppressive weight of attention lifted. They didn't stop walking until they reached the trailhead, even as full darkness fell. 12 people emerged from the Hoh rainforest at 8:47 p.m., all accounted for, all physically unharmed. But Michael knew that what they'd left behind would haunt him for the rest of his life. Epilogue. The official report listed Emily Hartwell as missing, presumed dead due to exposure and wilderness hazards. Thomas Blackwater's testimony about cultural sacred sites was noted but not given weight in the final assessment. Agent Sato's report included technical anomalies but stopped short of suggesting anything beyond natural phenomena. Michael submitted his resignation from the Park Service 3 weeks later. He couldn't work in forests anymore, couldn't walk trails without feeling that attention, that assessment of whether he belonged. He visited Tom Hartwell once, struggling to find words to explain what had happened to his daughter. But Tom surprised him. "She sent me a dream," the old man said. "Night before you came to tell me she was gone. In the dream, she was standing in a grove of trees so old they remembered the glacier's retreat, and she was smiling. She said, 'Dad, I finally found it. The question that matters. The place where science and spirit meet.' She seemed happy." "Tom, It's okay, Michael. I know you did everything you could, and I know my daughter. Once she found something worth protecting, nothing would pull her away from it." Tom smiled, sad but genuine. She was always going to give herself to something greater. "I just thought it would be a university position or a research institute. Turns out the forest made a better offer." Michael didn't go back to the Hoh rainforest, but sometimes late at night, he'd dream of marked trees and spiraling patterns. And in those dreams, he'd see Emily Hartwell standing guard over something ancient and vital, something that predated human understanding and would persist long after humanity faded. In those dreams, she'd look at him with eyes that held forests and centuries, and she'd whisper, "Protected, sacred, eternal." And in the morning, Michael would wake with a certain knowledge that some places belonged to themselves, and some people were called to be their guardians regardless of the cost. The Hoh rainforest continued to grow, layer upon layer, season after season, keeping its secrets in the spaces between the trees where human feet no longer tread. Thank you for reading to the end. If you appreciated this narrative, consider following for more engaging stories. What's your interpretation of Emily's fate? I'd love to read your theories in the comments.